Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Big Tent USA. My name is Kitty Douglas, and I'm honored to host tonight's panel discussion with filmmaker NAZRIN Choudhury, Dr. Austin Dennard, and Norbase Flint. Our Big Tent friend Katie Couric is here to moderate this critical conversation. At Big Tent USA, we put democracy over partisanship. I'm so honored to introduce our speakers tonight. NAZRIN Choudhury is a UK-USA filmmaker who left the pursuit of medicine and a brief career in politics after her first foray into screenwriting garnered her a Focus on Talent award with DNA Films. Based in LA, NAZRIN works extensively across film and television as a writer, producer, and showrunner. NAZRIN's directorial debut, which many of you watched tonight, Red, White, and Blue, which she also wrote and produced, so she's officially a triple threat, earned her an Academy Award nomination at the 96 Academy Awards. Austin Dennard, who is returning to Big Tent for a second time, is an OBGYN from Dallas, Texas. She might not be with us because she is making dinner for her children as we speak right now. Dr. Dennard had to leave Texas to receive abortion care after learning she was carrying a fetus with anencephaly, a fatal condition in which the skull and brain do not fully develop. She is now a reproductive rights activist. And in addition to that, to being a clinician, a reproductive rights activist, she has served as clinical professor at UT Southwestern Medical Center. Norbase Flint is president of All In Action Fund, working to achieve abortion justice and build the political power of voters of color. Prior to coming to All In Action Fund, she was the senior director of Black engagement at Planned Parenthood Federation of America. Norbase is founding member of Trust Black Women, a national coalition dedicated to increasing respect and support of Black women, and is one of the founding members of Black Women's Democratic Club. And our friend Katie Couric is an award-winning journalist and a #1 New York Times bestselling author. Couric was the first woman to solo anchor a network evening newscast, serving as anchor and managing editor of the CBS Evening News from 2006 to 2011. And you might have seen her on the Today Show before that. In 2017, she founded Katie Couric Media, KCM, which has developed a number of media projects, including a daily newsletter, Wake Up Call, which I read every morning, a podcast, Next Question, which I highly recommend, and a digital video series and several documentaries. You can find it all at katiecouric.com. I want to thank NAZRIN, Dr. Dennard, and Norbase for coming to Big Tent USA for tonight's important panel discussion. And of course, thank you to Katie for coming back to Big Tent, and I yield the floor to you.
Thank you, Kitty. First of all, thank you everyone who's joining us tonight. This is such an important conversation, and I'm looking forward to hearing your questions. You know, this was a really meaningful experience for me when I conducted a panel after a screening of this film in Sag Harbor over the summer. I still want NAZRIN to help us figure out how we can get more people to watch this movie because it's so beautifully done. As Kitty said, nominated for an Oscar. It should have won, in my opinion. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation. So thank you. I kind of feel everyone out there, even though I can't see you. So NAZRIN, I wanted to start, obviously, with you as the filmmaker of this extraordinary movie. Tell us what inspired you to make this just 1 month after Roe v. Wade was overturned.
Well, thank you. Can I just start by also saying thank you to you for being here, Katie, and doing the panel at Sag Harbor, to Big Tent, and to Norbase also for being here, and the incredible team that you have that put this together. I do want to give a quick big shout out, if I may, to Level Forward and 5 women who have become part of my elephant herd. There are many people to thank, but if you have seen the film, you'll understand that reference. Adrian Becker of Level Forward, Carmelin P. Malalis, Jennifer Dana, Lauren Bracco, and Catherine McLeod. These are women who are really the wing beneath wind beneath the wings of the film in this next impact campaign phase that we have. And in fact, I wrote it, I think it was about 2 weeks after the Dobbs decision in 2022. And I am the mother of 2 children myself, 2 daughters who will be inheriting this legacy. And, I think if you watch the presidential debate, we heard Kamala Harris, the vice president, speaking very powerfully about women bleeding out in parking lots. Well, I was one of those women bleeding out. Luckily for me, it was in a hospital under the medical supervision where I had 8-hour life-saving surgery to save my life, without which I would not be around to be a mom to my 2 daughters. So, I've started to really think about these very loaded and binary terms we have: pro-choice, pro-life, and what these things mean. Pro-choice, well, that's having access to healthcare and being able to choose to live and survive, which ties into the whole pro-life of it all. Like, I would say I'm pro-life again, pro-life just as much as anybody else. And so, I was listening to the news cycle and I turned to, really the medium in which I understand the world around me and the people that inhabit it. And I felt so badly for all the people who are not empowered with a platform to tell their stories. How could I tell a story that really covered the range of why someone might need this? And then when you understand what the story is, just really examining the depth and breadth of the egregiousness of all of this. And I think I might have told you this story when I met you at Sag Harbor, of reminding myself of Elizabeth Taylor, who is another Brit, but who made America her home like I did. And during the AIDS epidemic, she was so infuriated by everything she was seeing in terms of the lack of care for that community, that she turned around and said to herself, "Bitch, do something yourself." And that was really my words to myself is, there's no point feeling powerless. Let me tell a story that connects people, builds a bridge to our humanity, is something that transcends politics, hopefully, and really to riff on a term that's being used by the very people who are restricting our bodily autonomy. I think I just simply needed to make abortions legal again.
Let's talk about, I know not everyone on this call has seen the film, but I think it's important for us to say there is a gut-wrenching turn of events, and in the film itself. And I'm wondering, NAZRIN, if you can talk about whether you were influenced by real life events in terms of that. I'm trying not to totally give it away, but I also
No, I
think
think we should be able to give it away. And I'm sorry to the people who haven't been able to watch it. And, I think the film is very powerful once you've watched it, and you'll then be able to have the context of that.
And I have to say, NAZRIN, I was going to say, I watched it for a second time in the theater at Sag Harbor, and it was just as impactful as it was the first time. Everyone kind of gasped when that happened. But tell me why you made that decision, and was that the plan when you sat down to write this movie?
Yes. And so if we're able to go into the spoilers of it all, and apologies to anyone who hasn't seen it, but hopefully, as Katie said, the impact will still hit you. We have this young mom from Arkansas, and that she's, living off of a paycheck. We all know that many Americans actually don't have rainy day money. So she's from a very socioeconomically disadvantaged place in her life, and really is forced to go out of town for this very urgent and necessary abortion. She has to go 2 states across, through Missouri into Illinois. When we get there, we realize this abortion is actually for her 10-year-old daughter. And yes, there was a news cycle right after the Dobbs decision, in which a 10-year-old was traveling from Ohio into Indiana. And, I think I was so upset and infuriated by the fact that this child had egregiously had her choice taken away from her once already by what happened to her. And now again, the choice to get that healthcare that would deny her a life. I mean, thank God for the medical team that was able to help her out. But sadly, this isn't an anomaly. These cases happen more often than we think. And actually, shortly after I made this film, I read about a case in Mississippi where the mom was not able to get that healthcare for her daughter. And they are not, recently screened in Arizona to evangelical church leaders and the church community. And it was interesting because there's a phrase that came out of that environment where we know about Me Too, but there's a phrase that also says church too, because people recognize this story in their own communities. It is more prevalent than we care to think. But what I really wanted to do, I know people talk about, oh, well, let's not talk about the exceptions and these heightened cases that are not the norm. Sadly, they're more common than you think. That's number one. But number two, the reason I wrote this story is because the people who are on an opposite side of this debate to me, to them, they aren't really comprehending the depth and breadth of who this is affecting. And for me, it felt like if I could open up their eyes and ears and build their compassion for this child, maybe there's the movement there to then open yourself up to think about all the reasons why, which are portrayed in the film itself, when you're thinking it's the mom who's looking for this healthcare herself, all the reasons why she could need that healthcare. To me, it's been so meaningful to just be able to land that script, land it in the actuality of the film, and have people say to me, thank you for making this film, it changed my mind. Or thank you for making this film, this was my story. And while it took me back to a dark place, it reminded me of the women who were around me that supported me, and it allowed me to shine some light back into my life by remembering this dark period, but not having to block out all of it and remembering the people who are around me. Somebody else who wrote to me and said, I'm the lone voice in a Republican family in a red state, and I have been for the last decade trying to argue with them about protecting reproductive rights and speaking up for women, and they've never really understood it until I showed them your film. And really, for me, this is a conversation starter. And the conversation needs to continue into people's homes. I think this is a film that allows people, and it's happened even with members of our cast, one of our cast members told me that she has never spoken to her sister about this topic before until our film. And it really opened up an ability, because they were on different sides of that debate. But somehow the film has enabled a conversation to happen. And I think I'm really grateful for that, because the truth of it all is two things, really. Making abortions illegal won't stop abortions happening. It will just make them unsafe. And everybody knows somebody who has had an abortion. And if you think you don't, you do. It's just they may not feel safe enough to tell you what they've had to go through. So if this is a way of opening up a pathway to a dialogue towards meaningful change, which actually starts in our homes. I know we're talking about the ballot box, but it actually starts in our homes, in our own communities, and then can translate into the ballot box thereafter, because we just need to see each other as human beings deserving of compassion and walking a mile in someone else's shoes.
Well, I think you were so successful, Nazrin, in doing that. I thought Brittany Snow was just extraordinary in the film. Her daughter, someone asked, is the victim of a violent crime. And she is raped in her home by an intruder. It's not really clear, but she was victimized. And that's really, someone asked, how did the young woman, the
Well,
daughter.
actually, it's just as easily could be someone that she knows, which is
Yes,
very
true.
common. And
Yeah, you're
the
right.
police are actually there because a crime has happened, whether you know someone or not. And to
Yes,
me,
you're
it's really
right. That's a
important
good
not to
point.
focus. Yeah, and it was really important for me to not focus on how did it happen and why, because at a certain point, it doesn't matter. It's happened. and now she has to face the consequences. So you can draw whatever conclusions you want. I certainly know what the story is for me, but to me, that's not where the focus is. It really is about, this has happened and now what? And isn't it awful this has happened? Why does this young woman have to deal with this other issue?
Is Dr. Denard, is Austin with us, or is she still, she might be,
I think she's still busy,
okay,
Katie.
that's okay.
Oh, no,
I'm
she's
happy to
here.
move on.
She's
Oh,
here.
there you are. Hi, hi, Austin. Austin, you all has 3 children under the age of 5, and her husband had a flat tire, so she's been a little, and she's an OBGYN, PS. But Austin, Dr. Denard told me I could call her Austin. She's a 6th generation Texan. And I think everyone remembers that period where we started hearing the news that Roe would be overturned. Of course, there was a leak and then the actual overturning of Roe. And you were impacted in, I think, the most profound way, both as a doctor, obviously, and an OBGYN at that, and as a patient. Can you share your personal story with everyone here tonight, Austin?
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. And I, my toddler is on the toddler. Actually, do you have a Madeline? Are you good? Okay. There was a sharp object in the kitchen and I didn't want the 1-year-old getting it, but
Well, that takes priority.
yeah. So my story, I'm an OBGYN. I'm a mother of 3. I live in Dallas, Texas. Madeline, can you get him? Yeah. I live in Dallas, Texas. And, you know, in Texas, even before the fall of Roe, we were practicing under incredibly strict abortion restrictions. So it was something that I was experiencing in my training, my entire medical school and residency training, because I trained in Texas and went to med school in Kansas, where there was also many significant abortion restrictions there as well. But when SB 8 happened in Texas in 2022, that's when the vigilante laws came out. That was essentially, you know, the equivalent to the heartbeat bill, where it didn't matter if you were raped. It didn't matter if you had a pregnancy with a fatal fetal diagnosis. It really just didn't matter at all. In fact, if you started talking about abortion, if you said the word abortion, if you tried helping a patient get access to care, there were vigilante laws that you could essentially get taken to jail and to have your license revoked and be fined thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars just for aiding and abetting. So it was a new level of abortion restriction in the state that really paused any sort of care that we could give and induce so much fear and hesitancy in physicians that you really started to see an immediate enormous impact on patients. So I was back in 2022 grappling with this as a physician, even before Roe fell. And then when my husband and I decided that we wanted to be pregnant again, we had to come up with a plan of what would happen if we were in a similar situation where we needed to access abortion care. Of course, never thinking that we would actually need to do that.
But you should mention, Austin, that there was a reason why, I mean, you had reason to be concerned because of some past unsuccessful pregnancies.
Correct. You know, my husband and I had to access abortion care for our very first pregnancy that had another really horrific genetic diagnosis. And back before the fall of Roe, in 2018, with our first pregnancy, I was able to access abortion care in Dallas, just down the street from where we lived. But everything was very, very different when SB 8 happened. So having had the experiences that we'd had and the knowledge that we had as both, I'm also married to an OBGYN. So we really wanted that plan in place, but never thinking that we would really need it again until in 2022, I went for a routine ultrasound for a pregnancy that we were so excited to have after having my daughter, who's now 5, and my son, who's 3.5. They were much younger back then, but we went to an ultrasound visit and I looked up at the ultrasound screen and realized there's no skull and there's no brain in this pregnancy. It's not formed correctly. And that's when I knew we were going to have to flee the state to get care. So that began a whole nother experience personally that has forever changed me as a provider and as a woman and as a mother, and is definitely a reason why I feel so passionately about continuing the advocacy and the activism in the reproductive health care space, because we just have to keep talking about this subject.
In fact, you were fortunate because you could afford to leave your state, travel somewhere else, get abortion services, which you never should have had to do in the first place. But Norbise is really involved in helping women who don't have the means, and particularly women of color in underserved communities. Norbise, before we talk about how abortion may be motivating women to go to the polls and what you're seeing in that department, can you talk about the impact the overturning of Roe has had on communities of color? Uh-oh.
Are you
Norbise?
frozen?
No.
Oh, there you are.
So
You're muted.
sorry, my internet just froze.
Oh, no,
You're
it's
good
okay.
now.
You're back.
You're good.
So
Yay.
sorry. So I missed the last part of your question.
Sorry. I was saying how Austin was, I mean, obviously it was a horrific experience and a tragedy, but she was able to afford to leave Texas and
Mhm.
where did you go to get your services, Austin?
We decided not to say the specific state, but we went to the East Coast.
Okay. But I was saying, Norbise, that you work with women and communities of color who have been disproportionately impacted by this Supreme Court decision. And I wanted you to explain that.
Yeah, so thank you for having me. And of course, thank you for sharing your story and this incredible film. And just for context, All in Action Fund, we are a national organization dedicated to building political power for abortion justice through policy and politics. And we know this has been coming for a while. What we've seen that the Dobbs decision has been incredibly effective. And what I mean by that is that in the states where we've seen the bans, the full bans are mostly full bans, we've seen 95 to 100% drop in abortion access. And then when we look about where those bans are concentrated, they're overwhelmingly concentrated in the South, in the Midwest, where you have a disproportionate amount of number of folks of color. So what does this look like? This means that 1 out of 2 Black folks live in a state or live in the South where we see a lot of these abortion bans are. You see one of the largest populations of Latinas in the country in Texas are living under some grotesque abortion bans. And we know that they're hurting folks. So not only the bans, the criminalization that can happen, that we see creeping up with just a bill that passed in Louisiana, around that if you're carrying medication abortion, it is seen as like a class 1 drug. We also know that there is people having to travel farther, with Florida going dark. Whole Southeast is pretty much a desert for abortion access. And what that also means is that we see not only people having to go further for abortion care, but you see when you look at maternal mortality rates, which is something that is incredibly egregious numbers that we have in the United States already, we've seen an uptick in them, particularly in Texas. And so these abortion bans are having an incredible impact on people's day-to-day lives to choose or to figure out or decide if, when, and whether to have family.
And I know that 10 states will be voting on abortion ballot measures next month: Montana, Arizona, Missouri, Nebraska, Colorado, Florida, Maryland, Nevada, New York, and South Dakota. Can you give us an idea, even though I'm sure they're different in each state, sort of overall what these states will be deciding?
Yeah, so they're different. The ballots are different from each state. And so it's everything from just getting a straight up codification that you can get like some type of service, and to not only service, but being able to afford the service with coverage, right? Because before Dobbs, we also had the Hyde Amendment, which is still intact, which means that if you are covered by the federal insurance, which is our military, our folks who are in the Indian Health Service, our federal employees, they actually don't have coverage either in terms of abortion access. And so some ballot measures are looking to go a step further and really start looking at the bold policies that we need for what it means to have abortion access that's affordable, available, and accessible. What we also see is that people are fired up and then really excited about voting on this issue. We have done research and messaging and all the other pieces and tests and polling. And time again, this is a top issue, particularly for women who are saying, we want to be able to decide our futures and our families. And this is why we are coming to show out. It is because of abortion access.
And do you feel that that enthusiasm or that passion for voting on this issue has waned at all, or is it still as strong as ever?
We've seen it as strong. I mean, we will see in 14 days what that actually plays out. But what folks have been talking to us about, what we've heard from our partners, is that folks are really wanting to see change, and there is such a dramatic impact on this election. And so what I mean is in the sense of usually, I'm a millennial. People have been telling me for years, they're basing, this is the most important election of your lifetime. This is the most important piece of you got to go out and vote. And yes, all that is true. And this election has two different paths. One around abortion access that you can decide around your family. You can decide you can have safe, accessible abortion access in your community, and one that fantasizes about Handmaid's Tale as what we want to see, and what the piece is. And so I think people understand that, and we see a lot of people not only waiting to vote, they are already voting for these ballot measures and for elected officials that are bold on talking about abortion access.
And I just have to ask you quickly about Gen Z. I think people are wondering, are they going to really come out and vote? From your work that you've been doing on the ground, what is your sense?
Yeah, so what I've heard from Gen Z and from what our polling has said, they're actually more motivated by abortion access than candidates. And so the issues, whether it's abortion access or climate change or gun control, is actually what's bringing them to the polls rather than the candidates themselves. And so we think that Gen Z is going to show up and show out. Again, the proof is in the pudding in 14 days.
I was gonna
Um,
say
but
from your lips to God's ears, but
yeah.
let me ask Austin about the impact. We just heard about obviously how this is impacting women of color in particular, and I'm curious what you've seen in Texas about maternal mortality rates and some of these things, and just stories of these women who are just caught in these untenable situations as our protagonist in the film was.
Yeah, I mean, I always say I have an extreme amount of white privilege. So I was able to access care. I'm the best case scenario. I mean, can you think of a best case scenario other than a privileged white OBGYN who knows exactly what their diagnosis is, has, friends across the country who can help them access care through knowing people within the medical community. I mean, I really had everything going for me. But it really doesn't reduce the amount of pain and suffering that comes with having to leave your home and get on an airplane and go receive a procedure from a complete stranger in a city that you've never been to. And that was something that I felt I connected with so deeply in this film, was just the level of uncertainty that the protagonist that she's feeling with her daughter, which I'm sure we'll talk more about that later. But as far as your question, Katie, I mean, we're seeing everything that you would predict, right? We're seeing less access to care. We're seeing complete hesitation from physicians. We're seeing delayed care, which of any person, it doesn't take a medical person to realize if you're delaying care, bad outcomes are going to happen. Women are getting sicker, and the infant mortality rate has increased, right? I mean, this isn't surprising. If you're forcing women to be vessels and you're forcing them to carry pregnancies that are never going to survive outside their womb, of course the infant mortality rate is going to increase, because these babies, they suffocate in the arms of their parents after they are born. It's just absolutely tragic, and it's just so painful and unnecessary. So it's scaring doctors from practicing in Texas. You're seeing medical students who no longer want to apply to residency programs in our state because they're afraid that they're not really going to get the best training, right? It's very hard to train physicians in proper abortion care when you have no access to abortion clinics in your state. And in addition to just feeling like you can't even practice the standard medical care. You have the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists saying that we should be able to provide abortions for patients with all of these different medical indications. And then you have Ken Paxton and, you know, the Attorney General and everyone in Texas saying, oh no, you really need to think twice about whether or not you do that. So it's not surprising that it's deterring people from wanting to go into the specialty and then stay and practice medicine. I mean, you think about medical students and residents, a lot of these are women and men, but they're in a time in their life when they're wanting to start their families during residency in medical school. And so there's a lot of hesitation about starting a family in a state where you can't receive abortion care.
I wanted to ask NAZRIN about picking the Arkansas as the state where the film takes place. Talk to me about that decision and why you made it.
Absolutely. And in case you're seeing me kind of like I'm looking at the chat. So if you think I'm just
yeah, I
not
can't really
very
see
present.
that.
Arkansas was actually picked by my I could have said it in so many different states. I knew that I wanted to show not just one state that you have to traverse, but two. And my youngest, who was, you know, she's still a young teenager, but she was an even younger teenager at the time. She was very involved in some of the discussions that were happening and talked about Arkansas, which I think likes to boast about it being the most pro-life state. She was the one that said, this is where you should set the film. And so I went and did a deeper dive research because I could have set it in so many different places and thought, actually, you know, Arkansas, you know, this landlocked state surrounded by so many different other states seemed like the right place to set this. That was a decision for Arkansas. And maybe I'm jumping on one of your questions because
No. That's what I wanted to know about Arkansas. And can you tell us a little bit about the filming? Because you did it on a very reasonable budget, and you did it, how many days? I forget, NAZRIN, did it
5
take?
days, and it was a road trip and with children involved. And of course, there are necessary protections, which are completely valid and understandable, that apply legally for when you're filming with children. But it was really ambitious. There were times when, you know, the final scene of the film, you know, when they're talking about the elephants and the herd and so on, we literally had one take or two at the most that we could get that shot in and get those sentiments across before we were losing our child actors for the day. We had, you know, rain that happened in LA, and it never rains, you know, and it was like, are we going to be, luckily someone must have been smiling on us, because somehow we kept on finding solutions being presented to us where they wanted to switch over the days because there were weather restrictions and, you know, it was going to rain. But luckily the first day of filming was the road trip scene, and it was the one clear rainless day that we had. So we lucked out in so many ways, and so many ways in which this film could have not succeeded, but for the cast and crew, it's a real testament to our actors for being able to really go in and deliver those performances on such a tight schedule, but also to our crew who just, you know, I think I was able to get so much talent onto this, both on the screen and behind the screen, because they read the script. The script is 10.5 pages, and it's pretty much what you see on the screen. And it was a really difficult way to embark on the subject, because I knew I wanted to land that gut punch so I could get people to say yes. So it was like really having to do some really hard work of saying, I can't tell you what the script is about, because normally you do the whole preamble and you try to do the, let me entice you with this thing that I want you to work on, but I couldn't give that away. I needed people to read the script and get the same gut feel, the visceral moment, you know, of that on the page, which hopefully then translates onto the screen. And I think, you know, I was really lucky that Brittany Snow read that script, and at the moment that turn happens, she said she's never read a script before where her entire body turned to ice. So yes, there were challenges around, you know, making Los Angeles look like Arkansas. The rain actually did help us, even though it was difficult in other ways. But we just had to do what we had to do. You know, we still had COVID restrictions and all of that in place,
Right.
and logistically it was impossible. I would have loved to actually have filmed this in Arkansas. But you know, here is where the talent was to be able to do, for us to be able to do it on the budget that we had.
I wanted to throw a question out to Austin and Norbise, just because I wonder how you feel about this. There seems to be within the choice community, if you will, kind of the idea of a rational abortion or a good abortion versus a bad abortion. And, you know, obviously a 10-year-old child is sort of undeniably important, but is something being lost here in the conversation about women for whom a pregnancy is simply not wanted, or is the wrong time, or they have children already? In other words, what might be demonized by opponents of choice. And I'm curious to get your take on that.
Yeah, I'm always very sensitive to this subject, and I'm really glad when people bring it up, because within the pro-choice movement and group, there has been some criticism over, are we talking about good girl abortions versus bad
Right.
girl abortions? Like, you know, the other plaintiffs in the lawsuit that I participated in against Texas, like, were we all just a bunch of like good girl abortions that were trying to help the movement in a way that was overall not productive? And my argument for that is, I, of course, personally feel that any woman should be able to get an abortion for a pregnancy if she needs or wants one. But situations like mine, situations like what are in the movie, I think for people who haven't really sat down and internalized and dissected what it could potentially be about abortion that makes them uncomfortable, situations like this can help bring that conversation up to the surface, because it is all of our own responsibility to sit and think about abortion and dissect why we could potentially have internal biases about it. What is it? Is it our upbringing? Is it our religion? Is it society? Is it the state in which you've grown up in, where there already have been restrictions on abortion that just you've internalized your entire life and maybe helped form your opinion about abortion? What is it that makes you feel uncomfortable about it? Because if we are being realistic and we think about our bodies and how many times your heart is beaten in order for you to be sitting here right now, and how many steps your feet have taken on this earth for you to be able to do all the things and that you've been able to do in your life, like how your body has served you in this world. And then to think of a situation where someone externally is saying your body, that vessel that has catapulted you into your life, you're no longer in charge of and you have no autonomy over, is a really jarring thing to think about. So what I like about stories like ours is that it brings a conversation to the table, and it helps the discussion of, if these restrictions are in place, then the bottom has fallen out. and even victims of rape, even victims of
Incest or
horrible
violent
medical
crime.
situations are still needing care, and those individuals are still not getting the care. And it really should be our country's obligation to provide bodily autonomy and support for the most vulnerable. So that's my argument.
Yeah,
And
go ahead, Norvese.
just to add, I think one of the pieces we keep repeating is that we don't know the circumstances in which why the decision is being made, and which is why we need to leave it up to people and their family. And that however we feel about abortion access, we don't think that politicians should be the ones that making decisions about what's happening in our families and our futures. And that's just as simple as it is. And we take it off of like who's in what circumstances of abortion and say that like that is our families. We don't know what's going on behind closed doors.
I wanted to get to some audience questions because we have very engaged and smart people who are joining us tonight. Isn't it nice when you are around smart people? It's such a joy. Anyway, someone commented, oh, well, let me ask you first. Someone said my podcast was very enlightening this week. Thank you. But I did talk about late stage abortions and how they are really being used to frighten people in this country. And I thought, Austin, you would be the perfect person to help explain how the right is using quote unquote late stage abortions to manipulate voters or even after birth abortions. And I think they are conjuring up these terrifying scenes, and it's very upsetting for people to even kind of talk about it, but they're not telling the truth about these situations, are they?
I mean, no, of course not. So late term abortion is not even a medical term. This is a
Right.
term
I'm
that
glad you
was
pointed that out.
that was created by the antis to do what they do time and time again, which is to spread misinformation and to scare individuals and to describe abortion in ways that just it really isn't in practice in real life. So abortions that are happening after that anatomy scan, which is at 20 weeks, are you would have to ask each individual politician what they think a late term abortion is, because of course it's not a medical term. But I listened to Pete Buttigieg speak about this once, and I think he said it so beautifully. You have to think about these situations where these are pregnancies. First of all, abortions after 20 weeks, it's less than 1% of abortions. So it's like such a small number to begin with. But these are pregnancies that families have thought of a name. They have had baby showers. They've set up the nursery, and they are going to their doctor and receiving some of the most catastrophic, heartbreaking, change your life forever type of diagnosis. And to even think that any of us would know what that feels like, and that we as an external person should be making decisions and judging the need and decisions that they are having in the privacy of their family with their provider is just so wrong and so intrusive that we really don't have any place to say about what they should and should not be doing. So again, it goes back to the question of we shouldn't be asking why and judging like, whether or not, do you have a good enough reason to be going through this, and really realize that these are horrible, catastrophic situations usually. So, or
yeah,
always.
and one, if I could just add that
Please.
usually a medical decision that's made because it's either going to be detrimental for the mother's life or the child's life, and sometimes even both. And I speak as someone whose mother had multiple miscarriages, and a stillborn child. And I myself, Dr. Dennard, when you were talking about people who have thought about names and so on, I actually took my 2 children in for my scan, thinking it was going to be such a warm and lovely moment to share with them, to have this third child, and they would be there part of that moment. And I didn't know how to explain it to them, why, mommy wasn't happy anymore and why mommy was crying. And then I tried to go home. I was given the medication for you to naturally miscarry, and it couldn't happen. It just wouldn't happen. And at a certain point, if I was not able to get the abortion that I needed, which by the way, is a very loaded term for no reason whatsoever. And as a doctor in Arizona recently reminded all of us, is like that term, there's such a thing as spontaneous abortion, which Dr. Stannard, I'm sure you know, that's a term that the medical profession uses, where your body decides that it won't carry and spontaneously carries out that procedure. So there's many different ways in
Then
which
if you can't get a DNC, Nazrin, you can go into sepsis, right,
this
Austin? I mean,
sepsis, exactly. And for me, in 2012, the year that I arrived in America, and I always say, don't let my accent fool you. I am an American citizen here who can vote and raising 2 children. In Ireland, this poor woman was not able to get what she needed, and she died of sepsis. That would have been my fate too. And the entire country, ostensibly rose up and said, no, what happened was wrong, and we need healthcare and we need it now. And they changed the law of that country. And so for me, coming to America, where, I came at a time where I had got that healthcare in the UK. And I certainly thought that healthcare would be afforded to me and my children, who will inherit this legacy for a long time to come. For them to have less rights than me is crazy.
I wanted to ask a question. Norbese, I wonder if this is a good one for you to answer. Someone said, and I'm not sure about this either, although I think I know. Can you help us understand what it will take to overturn the Dobbs decision? When Harris wins, what is, or if Harris wins, depending on how you're feeling about the election and what you're thinking, what is the realistic timeline for change, and what does that look like in the states with restrictive laws?
Yes. Okay. So this is where I get a little nerdy for a second.
Oh, please,
Um,
nerd out on us.
So the most straightforward way requires actually Congress. And so not only do we need Harris in the White House, we need a Democratic House and Senate in order for us to bring a bill. If that also happens, we also need to get rid of this little thing called the filibuster, because there is not a world that we're going to get to 60. And so not only a trifecta is needed, then there also needs to be something that either breaks the filibuster for good or breaks it for abortion access. And so those are the pieces that are needed. Congress needs to hand Harris a bill in order for us to be able to make abortion access the law of the land. Now, with that being said, that actually can happen pretty fast if we get the political power to do so. But that is the political power that we need to have and build. And particularly, I want to emphasize this point because we cannot take our foot off the gas, because we still do have a court that is not doing very court things, I would say, to say it nicely, but we still have a Supreme Court out there that can actually still mess with it, even if we pass a piece of legislation. So that means that not only do we need to keep a bill, like we get to build the political power, we need to continue to organize to make sure that we are able to keep applying pressure to elected officials to remind them that abortion access is something that is a right, and we have the right to deserve to decide what happens to our families in our future. Now, I will say quickly, the way to break abortion more is actually quite easy. There are different ways, whether it's Comstock law, which is an archaic piece of legislation that is floating around. There are other ways that we can break abortion without Congress, right? But we're going to need the trifecta to fix it at the federal level.
And that would then invalidate all these state laws that have been adopted in the last year or so.
Yeah, but I think it's also important while we're having this conversation that we really do need to ask for a bold piece of legislation because abortion access, like Roe was the floor. People still were not getting the access that they need. They still did not have coverage. People still had to travel. We still didn't have enough providers. And so, in this time where we have a space to rebuild what we need to be actually pushing our elected officials for a bold piece of legislation that actually answers all the problems um, that happened with Roe that we've seen for years that's happened in the since 1973.
I thought I would ask Austin this question because you live in Texas. Somebody asked if someone can give Ted Cruz a copy of this movie. But you said someone writes, in the conversations that you have had or heard regarding the importance of a woman's right to choose, what is the most effective way to discuss this topic with evangelicals in a way that can impact how they will vote? So many evangelical women are voting for Trump for this reason alone. Austin, any thoughts about that? I'm sure you have people in your community who probably disagree with you on this issue.
Yes. Well, to quote our friend Jessica Valenti, we have to use our activists and advocacy energy. We have to point it in the right direction. So sometimes there will be a group of people that you just can speak until you're blue in the face and it's not going to change their mind. This is where I do think storytelling is important, and having examples of situations of the horrible aftermath impacts of these abortion restrictions really helps bring this to a different level where you can speak about it in a more human way instead of hypotheticals when you have real life examples about it. But I don't have much advice over talking to people who don't want to listen. But I think when we do come together and we listen to each other, and we realize that we have a lot more commonalities than we do differences, it does help bring us together when it comes
Well,
to this.
also, I was going to say films like this, I think, are a great
Exactly.
entry point, as you mentioned earlier. Even though, it's one situation, it opens the door to conversation. It puts a human face on a story that is really discussed by pundits on a desk at a cable news outlet. I don't think it just to be able to see these people, to see her counting her change every night with her tips and saving money. It just brings it to life so much more effectively. It's one of those movies that just stays with you and you just never forget it. And so beautifully done, Nazrin. And as I said, I can recall so many moments from the film. In fact, when you talked about elephants, I just was like, oh God, I remember that moment from the film. But thank you for doing it. And I can't read
I know there's a
all the
lot.
all
Yeah.
the messages, but thank you all for so much for being a part of this conversation. I was really a lunatic about getting this in the Big Tent agenda before the election because I thought it was so important and so powerful. And I'm so grateful you all as panelists added so much to the conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, I just want to thank all of you. A lot of women shared their personal stories tonight with us, and we're very grateful for that. Norbese has kindly offered to send us out on a high note, and I
Oh,
for one,
good.
am ready for a high note. So I just want to thank Nazrin and Dr. Denard and Katie, but Norbese, take us home. Give us some inspiration.
It's not that inspirational, but what I was just going to say is that I want us also just to keep hope, and that is important because one of the things that folks are trying to do is kill our hope and kill our spirit. Our country has been in worse times before. I am a descendant of chattel slavery. And I get to be here and have conversations because people kept fighting, kept hoping when things were dark. And so even though I said a very complicated process around how we get abortion access in this country, it is deeply important that we keep hope, that we keep faith, that we keep fighting, because we do know that it actually makes change. People would not be trying to not have us vote. They would not be trying to rip all these things if it didn't matter. So please, please, please keep that hope alive.
I'm so glad
Oh.
you ended on that note because I've been feeling shaky lately and I need to be inspired. So Norbe, say thank you for that.
We needed that. Good night, everyone. We'll 2 more weeks. Let's go. Let's do it.